All right, in this video, we're going to talk about vacuum advance versus mechanical advance. And I want to tell you, it's your choice. Whatever you want to do, that's up to you. And typically, I run a mechanical advance when I'm trying to get the most amount of performance out of my engine, even for the street. And yes, you can run mechanical advance and have a stock carburetor and have no dead spot. So the people's car came with the vacuum advance, and the premium car, the Porsche, didn't. And the Porsche was driven on the street just like this is. So guys are saying, that's only for the drag strip. Okay, Porsches are only for the drag strip. No, they were street cars, and they were getting the maximum performance out of the engine. That's why they went with mechanical. Well, no, Mike, they were dual carbs. Was the square back dual carbs? And it had a vacuum advance. Running a mechanical advance is a little bit more work because you've got to get your jetting spot on. And that's why they probably ran the other one on the VWs versus the Porsches, because they could spend a little more time when they're getting a little more money for the car. And on the cheap cars, they went for the vacuum advance because it kind of hides some of the issues with the carburation. I'll go over the details of this right now. So in order to understand advance, we have to kind of draw a little diagram here so you can kind of see what we're looking at. As your engine increases RPMs, so your total advance comes in, say, around 3,000 RPMs, all right? And you can play with that if you need to for more top end. If you there's ways to do all kinds of stuff with it, but this is just a basic diagram. This comes in around 1,000, say, and then as your engine increases in RPMs, this is your demand. Your engine is demanding more and more and more advance, basically in that curve right there. So to understand this, you need to understand what timing is. Timing is actually the time that it takes for the fuel to burn. So that's why you want your advance before BTDC, before top dead center. And how they do that is by degrees of movement of the pulley, okay, of the crankshaft. Is you have your timing earlier and earlier and earlier as your RPMs increase. So this is basically what we're looking at here. So in order to get the correct amount of time that it takes for the fuel to burn, as you increase your RPMs, you have to have your timing come on earlier and earlier and earlier so that it's got that time that it needs to burn correctly. Now, just so you know, a higher compression engine takes less time for the fuel to burn, so they'll have less advance. A lower compression engine is going to take more time for the fuel to burn. And the same thing with turbo. When you have boost, you're going to need a lot less advance because you're putting pressurized air into the combustion chamber, which takes a very short time to burn. That's why you have really retarded timing on a turbo engine. And the same with supercharged. So how mechanical advance works is by spring tension. And what it is there's weights in springs. And as your engine gains RPMs, the springs retain the weights, and the weights eventually reach at about 3,000 RPMs your total advance by just weights and springs. So what that does is, because of the weights and springs method, is it brings up a very even advance, kind of like the first line here, and goes nice and evenly up, which is what your engines are needing. With a vacuum advance, it does partly weights and springs. So one portion of it has weights and springs. The other portion of it is done by vacuum. And the vacuum, as you step on the gas or let off the gas, changes the amount of advance that you're getting. So as you step on the gas harder, it brings on more advance, which makes it feel a little bit better sometimes, but it may not be better because you might be bringing on advance at a too much advance at an earlier place. And that might limit the amount of a total advance that you're going to get out of the distributor, because if you're over advanced down here, then what happens is you might start pinging at one of these RPMs here and have to lower your timing a little bit to be able to run all the way through your curve. So the vacuum advance can limit your total advance, which may not be what you really want to do, especially if you're running higher RPMs, which most of us are on the freeways today. We're going much faster. So now on a vacuum advance distributor, your timing is partly mechanical and partly vacuum. And the vacuum port that you use up here, right here in your carburetor, you don't use any of these ones, please. This one only. They call it today on the internet ported vacuum. Never really heard that term, but I've always heard carburetor vacuum. It's a new term to me in 40 years. Never heard it. Carburetor vacuum is above the throttle plate. Manifold vacuum, if you see these little things here go down, they go down to manifold vacuum, is below the throttle plate. So at idle, you have no vacuum coming out of here. As soon as you crack the throttle open, you immediately put advance into your distributor with a vacuum advance distributor. There is a little bit of delay though, because there's a spring inside of here that resists that vacuum, so it comes on like that, and there's a little bit of delay with that. Now the mechanical portion doesn't start to come on till kind of later on with these. So the thing about the vacuum advance is it kind of operates and moves to correct some of the running issues with your engine. In other words, to me, it sort of manipulates the problems you might be having and making them go away, and you make it feel like, hey, I throw a little bit of advance at it and these problems go away. So guys go, hey, I've got a dead spot, and I put the vacuum advance on and immediately the dead spot's gone. Well, what it did is throws advance at it. Is that the right thing to do, or do you have a lean problem? You don't know, because your engine demand is like this. As your RPMs go up, you need more timing, just like I showed you in this diagram. This is your actual engine demand. But the vacuum advance kind of goes up and down like this to get to that. So my point is I would rather be like the Porsche and have my engine properly tuned so that this is working correctly for me, versus trying to mask it by having a fluctuating advance, because the engine demand is not requiring that, because everything is based on the engine RPMs. If you understand how timing works, the higher the RPMs you go, the more need for advance. Now, personally, I spent a lot of money for the parts in this engine, and I want to make sure that I'm getting the most bang for my buck. So I'm not giving away any timing. I want to make sure that I get the most amount of timing in my engine that I can, because that's money. You're paying for performance parts, so you want your engine to have optimum performance and be able to go on the roads today. You want advance. Now, to get the maximum advance out of your engine, one of the best ways is to use a mechanical advance. It's not the only way. There's ways to do it with vacuum, but not stock, okay? You have to do a lot of other little things to it. So you can use a vacuum advance distributor on a performance modification, but you better really be willing to play with a lot of things add things like vacuum delay valves. I've done all this stuff, you guys, so I'm no newbie at this. Here's the reason why you need a mechanical advance to get the most performance out of your engine. Street, strip, doesn't matter. You can correct all the drivability issues with jetting and getting everything right, because that was the easy way for the people's car for them to correct issues. Throw a vacuum advance distributor on there, cushies it all up, makes you feel good. Great idea for cheap car engineering. For the Porsche, they didn't go with that. They went for getting the jetting correct, having a mechanical advance so that would get more performance out of their engine. That's what I like to do for the street, for whatever. So let's talk about the problems with trying to get maximum advance with a vacuum advance distributor. And I've got this vacuum gauge here. We're going to do a video in the near future showing the actual vacuum advance distributor and the mechanical advance distributor, how that they correlate with the engine, and how that this stuff that I'm talking about in this video works. But I want to make sure to have the 034 distributor, because that's the one that everybody seems to say it corrects all the problems. Put that one on. Okay, so I want to have that one here because it has different advance than the one I just showed you in the video. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've had one of those, but it runs up to a 28-degree total advance, just like the 009 does, but uses vacuum and mechanical to get there. So we want to have a good comparison. All right. So what does vacuum do when you hook it up to that port? As soon as I step on the gas, I get a large amount of vacuum. So what that's going to do is that's going to throw advance right away at my distributor. Now let me ask you this. It doesn't take rocket science to think about this for maximum performance. Okay? If you have too much advance at a low RPM under a load, what does that cause? Not a tough answer. It's called detonation. Is that your friend with a Volkswagen? No, it's not your friend. So the price you pay for having that nice cushy advance moving up and gives you that little bit of a, pulley pull or whatever. Honestly, I run a vacuum advance distributor on my engines after I've tuned them, and I put a mechanical advance distributor, and you really can't tell the difference. It feels the same. Okay? But I cannot get as much total advance out of my distributor because at low RPMs, it's punching all this extra advance in, okay? And I'm getting a curve that kind of looks more like this as you hit the gas, okay? Is that what your engine is demanding as far as the actual RPMs, like I was talking about? You're doing something called manipulating by throwing advance at it. And the manipulation is costing you because now I've got over advanced issues down here where, you shouldn't be doing this anyway. Let's say I'm just above idle and I floor the car. I might have way too much advance early on and start to ping. And then what that'll do is it'll limit me. I'll have to go, oh shoot, I better take away some advance here, retard my timing a little bit here, because now I can't run 32 degrees total advance up here where I'd like my RPM, I like to have power, okay? So I'm losing, I get feeling good down here or whatever, and I'm losing up here. So basically, I'm masking issues that I can fix on my carburation and sacrificing where I could have more advance up here. So instead of running a total advance of 32 degrees, you got to run 28. That's costing you. And honestly, down here is you shouldn't be worried as much about this anyway, because you got a Volkswagen, it's air cooled, and why are you bogging it? I personally have never driven a VW like that. I always drive with my RPMs up, and let the air go through the engine. I learned that. I've been driving a Volkswagen before I had a driver's license. My aunt and uncle had Volkswagens. They used to tell me, we were riding in the car, my cousin's learning and everything else. We were all learning how to drive. Oh, keep the RPMs up. It's air cooled. Make sure you keep your RPMs up. That's the way we always did it, even with stock, with normal factory advanced distributors. Before we put it on 009s, all that, we always kept our RPMs up because that's better for the engine. So I like to run as much advanced as possible. I like to have my, 28, 32. I might even go more, especially if I'm going performance engine, even on the street. Of course, street engines we're talking about. I don't go on the track at all, but I like that engine to perform well, just like the guys who drive the Porsches do. They like their engine to perform well. That's why I build them with counterweighted cranks, because I'm going to put more RPMs in there, because RPMs are where you get power in Volkswagens. You have to think about these things as a pump, okay? It pumps so much air going through it. The more air you get to go through there, the more, or air and fuel you get to go through this pump, the more horsepower it's going to put out. Now, when you have a smaller engine, like a 1600, 1800, versus having a 2332, okay, you have to put more air through this sucker to get the horsepower out of it. If you watch some of those engine things they did with EMPI, that was kind of neat, because you saw how that they would get horsepower out of a tiny engine by putting it up to 10,000 RPMs, which we're not going there, okay? But I'm just telling you the engineering, or how that works. More air and fuel goes through there, more horsepower. That's why they have turbo. What turbo does is it compresses the air that goes into the engine and gives you more horsepower, because the air is already compressed, so it gets more air and fuel through the engine than the stock setup. Same thing with the the supercharger. They used to make the little Judson Super. It put more air and fuel through this pump, and that makes it develop horsepower. So you can do that with RPMs. You can do that with, turbo. You can do that by having a bigger engine. Those are all things that you do to get horsepower and torque. So another reason I like mechanical advance is because this is my advance curve, this line right here. I can have it be predictable when I'm trying to do tuning. When I have advance that's moving around, it manipulates me to not, well, is this a carburetor issue? Is this just throwing advance at this? What's happening here? It's easier for us. And this is what a lot of guys do performance stuff like. They like that straight curve that they can play with their jetting, especially the guys with dual carbs. That's why they don't have a vacuum port on the dual carbs, because you're going to do it with the jetting, and which is the proper way to do it, which is, again, the way the Porsches did it, the way the performance engines all did it. And they were street cars, again. Okay, guys, take these distributors off and throw them away. Oh, those are junk. They shouldn't belong on a street car. Well, I got news for you. Every street car I have has one of those distributors on it, and I have no problems. I don't have any dead spots in my cars. None. Even a stock engine. It's just because I'll play with the jetting and get it what the VW engineers probably didn't want to do, because it's cheaper and easier to just throw a vacuum advanced distributor on the car and make it feel good. It's more work to get the carburetor to work right. So back in the early days of the people's car, they had a mechanical advanced distributor in the 25 horse. And then what they did is, in the later years, they went to a vacuum advance. And I believe the reason was because they had a very simple carburetor that didn't work that great. And they could hide some of the issues with that carburetor with Vacuum Advance, because basically when you take your engine off of idle, as soon as you step on the gas, it bumps the Advance up, makes it feel a little better. Kind of like just throwing a Band-Aid on it real quick. Then the Porsches came out and they decided that they're going to get the carburation to do the job correctly. And that's when they started, you went to the mechanical advance on the Porsche, the 010, which is similar to the 009. That's kind of where the idea came from. Because guys like myself wanted to get more advance out of their engine. It's money on the table, guys. It's a simple thing to do. The more advance you can get out of your engine, the more power you're going to get. Sometimes 2 or 3 degrees in your top end where your power is on these, because it's a small engine, okay, your power is going to be on the top. You got to get the air through the pump, okay? And you want that. You want that when you're on the road, okay? And some guys, well, that gets rid of the drivability issues. Well, you know what? You jet that out. You fix it. You fix what the guys aren't willing to do. That's the way that I do it. Now, if y'all want to just put on Vacuum Advances, that's fine. At least now you know what you're doing. You found out, okay, this is why this was happening. This is why that they made this way. Okay? It made it simpler. Okay? Me, I'll take the harder route. I've got money in that pancake motor, and I want to get as much out of that money as I can. I don't want to throw anything away. All right? Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Vacuum Advance stuff, highly technical stuff that you can do. You can play with advanced curves by using a Vacuum Advance distributor for performance. And we used to do things with something called a vacuum delay valve. We'd put the vacuum delay valve, it would slow down the advance going into the other and play with the weights. I did this stuff on Chevys, okay? It's a little harder to do on VWs because, the distributors are hard to get apart. So there are things that you can do to do performance, but these are not things that the guys are on the internet are talking about. They're saying that the Vacuum Advance is the only distributor you should ever put on your VW. These other ones, I'm going to throw them in a bin. I got a bin full of those garbage things. It's like, no, they're not garbage. They work really well. You just need to do your homework and make sure that you tune your engine properly, which is what VW didn't do. They just went for the cheap out. It's easy. Just throw some advance at it. It makes you feel better. Solves the problem. That's what I believe they did. That's my opinion. Okay? Y'all can do whatever you want to do, but that's the reason personally that I use a mechanical advance, because I want to be in control of what's going on. And when I've got this advance going up and down, it's hard for me to tell, okay, am I having a carburation? Am I a little lean when I hit the gas? Because the advance is coming on and it's not telling me, I'm getting manipulated by that advance. Now, if I'm going to run a Vacuum Advance distributor, I'm going to tune it first with a mechanical advance. Then I'm going to run the Vacuum Advance. But even at that, by the time it's tuned and it's running good, why would I put on a Vacuum Advance distributor? Because I've already fixed the issues. Okay. That's all I have to say on that. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.